Welcome back to the Rob Scott Show. Here we are. Today, we are going to be talking about a bunch of things that can make us happier. We're going to be talking about what and why of positive psychology, and we're going to talk about the 3 lives that we each want to lead and want to improve. Yes, you have 3 lives, and we're going to tell you what they are and how to make them better in this episode.
Are you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
How you doing, Sarah?
Good. Welcome back to the Rob Scott Show, guys. Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's we're very, very happy that you're here. We hope this is a really valuable episode. This is all based primarily on a guy named Martin Seligman's work. He's out of the University of Pennsylvania, and he's really one of the leaders, at least if not, one of the main leaders of the positive psychology movement. He's also the creator of something called learned helplessness, right? And so what we're going to do today is I want to cover 3 tangible ways that you can be much happier right now. And they're actually in very different dimensions, okay? And one of the reasons this is interesting is that we might think, like, if you were to go to a therapist or you were to think about your own psychology, your own meaning making in some way, you might think that just better is always done in the same way. But one of the things that we found out is that what it takes psychologically to stop misery and dysfunction is actually very different than what it takes to create happiness. Okay. And so positive psychology is a relatively new study in the realm of psychology as compared to sort of stopping, the real bad stuff. So ultimately, Dr. Martin Seligman boiled these down into, and as well as other people came up with, these 3 different lives that we want to learn how to lead. And one is the pleasant life, one is the good life, and one is the meaningful life. Okay. And so, one of the things I want to share about this is kind of the history of psychology. If you think about, and I don't have the dates, but let's say that we've really been working on psychology for, 100 years, 150 years, 75 years, whatever that is, right? The majority of that focus has been to end really bad psychology. So to end insanity, depression, anxiety, all these things. And we didn't, long ago, we used to like drill into people's heads to let the spirits out, right? We haven't always done this well. And one of the questions of positive psychology is, it's one thing to kind of take somebody who's really dysfunctional and bring them up to functional, but what is it to take somebody who's functional or close to functional and make them exceptional? Like, what is it to do? And that's really, over the last handful of years, maybe 15, 20 years that there have been real deep study of this. What is it to make an okay mind exceptional? And it's a different set of tools, right? What stops depression is not exactly what makes you, blissful and super happy, right? And so we end up with these 3 pillars of happiness, or 3 demonstrably, repeatable ways that if you improve any one of these, you will improve the quality of your life in a big way. And again, that's the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life. So I don't want to just keep rattling on. Sarah, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I'm excited for this talk because I think what is awesome about your business and what you do as coaching and what services we provide is that we often are reaching down to help people who are in deep suffering heal. And then the other side of it is I like thinking of that spectrum as bigger, and that we can take people who are not necessarily in deep suffering and make them feel better, be more productive, be happier. And I know that's also, a lot of what we're trying to do here on the podcast. So I'm really excited.
And if you do both, it's an even bigger swing, right? Like it's,
right.
So, just removing pain from someone is like ecstatic because of the difference, right? Often what we're happy about is something has changed and we're now in this new space and it feels better and different. So it's amazing to go from poor or dysfunctional or whatever up to normal. That's amazing. And it's great. But if you then take normal and you just hang out there, you're going to find yourself with the normal everyday struggles of what, the Stoic might say, or the normal, the Buddhist idea of like, there's just so much kind of natural suffering of what's going on. So what is it really to be exceptional? And we have a lot of miscommunication about this. We think it's that consumption and consumerism. We think it's just more money, more things, more fame, more whatever. And what you find is, and anybody who's gotten all of those really nailed down seems to report back. I'm not saying that they don't change the game a little bit, but they seem to report back that like, that's really not the whole game, right? So what we're trying to figure out is what really is the game or the games that we should be playing. And so Martin Seligman and others have done some great work on whittling these down to 3 areas that really, really matter. Now, again, because we're talking about positive psychology, this isn't going to necessarily stop dysfunction, right? There's different work to do if you're super miserable or depressed or have, anxiety issues or whatever's going on there, or if you're delusional. I mean, clearly schizophrenia, all those things, there's different stuff, right? You might need medication, you might need hospitalization, you might need, different stuff. So fixing trauma, all that stuff is different. But what we're talking about now is if you lead a fairly okay life and you really want to be exceptional, like how do you optimize for that and what would that look like? Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to start with the pleasant life. And, maybe I'll just tell you what each of these are in a little bit more clarity, right? So the pleasant life is really about the skill of being able to have more pleasure in your life, right? Are you good at feeling pleasure? Do you allow yourself to feel pleasure? All that stuff. And we'll go into each of these in more detail. The good life is more like, are you connected to what you're passionate about? I'm going to connect this to like being able to find flow states. And do you have things in your life that you really, really enjoy so that you can go back and actually kind of hunker down and feel like, I'm living a good life. Like I'm lucky that I get to work on these things, or I've got this great hobby, or I've got this other thing that I really excel at, right? And we'll get into that in more depth also. And then the third one is the meaningful life. And this is something that I focus quite a bit on, and you'll hear later why that is. But the meaningful life is really about like, are you on a mission? Are you connected to your purpose? And the thing that's really interesting, if you get better at any one of these, it is an improvement in your subjective experience of being alive, right? That's what Martin Seligman and others have found out, that if you get better at having pleasure in your life, that does, not only in the moments of pleasure, but if you consistently you're better at that, it actually ups your happiness to, some degree. If you have more flow states, if you have more passion in your life, if you're more connected to what's good for you, that increases happiness. And then the big one is really if you're leading a meaningful life and you're connected to something that is a big purpose, is something that really matters for you, that's a big deal. So, and please, Sarah, just interrupt me.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I love that, because another thing that we do is often we're talking about awareness and mindset, but another really key part of what Rob does in our business is talking about different ways that we can show self-love, because that plays a huge role. Yeah. And so I really enjoyed this particular topic because it's encouraging you to love yourself, right? These are all different ways that we can practice self-care and self-love. So hopefully this is really beneficial to you guys listening.
That's killer. Nice. Yeah. And all of those, if you don't have self-love, that's going to lead you to feel worse. That's going to take you out of high function. So what we want to do here is really get this. So let's talk about the pleasant life. Let's talk about as much positive emotion as you can have, right? Having as much pleasure as you can. So if I start to talk about this, a lot of us really struggle with this because it starts to sound hedonistic or selfish, or, we might have the problem like, hey, I don't know what is pleasurable. I don't know what makes me happy. I mean, I used to really enjoy, making love or sex or whatever. And that doesn't, I'm not as drawn to that. And, an older man might feel that way or something, right? There's these different things, or, women certainly can feel that way. Lots of people can feel that way. I used to really enjoy sugar, but now it kind of makes me feel bloated and I get, cavities and all this stuff. Right. So it's like,
we're just laying around, like relaxing, just laying on the couch. Yeah. Like, anything that gives us we're not producing, right? This pleasurable life is just it's more, would you say, like a feeling? It's you're feeling good.
I'm going to get to what it is, but before we even start to describe that, because there's some very clear areas where we can get better at this in a holistic way that is sustainable and actually grows true pleasurable life, right, in a way. But we really do struggle with this because many of us don't feel that we deserve happiness. Mm-hmm. Many of us have the meaning that people that are just having fun and being in pleasure all the time are super selfish, like that a lot of us feel like we should be more martyred, or we should be, we're more impressive if we've been a victim, or look at what I've been through, or any of that stuff. We have messaging, religious or otherwise, telling us not to be selfish. But growing our ability to have pleasure doesn't have to take from others. It doesn't have to be that. So let's talk about some ways that we can, do this in a better way, right? One is mindfulness. If we can actually get out of the lost kind of thinking mind, and we can actually be more in experience and actually more curious about, kind of in awe of the experience of being alive. And some people might just have to take my word for this, but consistently as people do this more, you start to find that the very average things in life can start to have pleasure come back in, right? Going for a quiet walk, just being with your breath and noticing the stillness, connecting with that underneath energy that is the aliveness that's in all of us, right? Noticing right now the tingling, or the fact that you can tell that your hand is there without looking at it, right? There's an aliveness in you that if we can quiet the noise and get present to that, that's incredibly satisfying, and it really becomes beautiful. But let's get to something that's a little more direct for people that, excuse me, don't need to start a new practice or something.
Right.
Learning how to savor your food, right? I like the example of, Thich Nhat Hanh. I remember this. He talks about, eating an orange and just taking one little piece out of an orange and spending maybe a half an hour eating one wedge of an orange, just literally slowly letting it open and open and open, and, breaking open the next little nodule in the orange and tasting that fully. Now compare that to how the normal American eats an orange. It's like scarf, scarf, scarf. Maybe we're connected to how delicious it is. Maybe we're actually doing email at the same time. We're missing all of this pleasure that's right there in the thing that we had. We get done it and maybe we ate it too fast, and so we feel bloated, or maybe we were craving another one. And if you actually add that up, there's not a lot of pleasure in it. It might be delicious, and or slamming a glass of orange juice or whatever. It's this big hit, but it's not sustainable. And by contrast, there's a different way to connect with savoring things, right? Slowing down, eating your food, right? Connecting to gratitude, fostering positive emotion, and taking the time to do that ups the pleasure factor in your life. So if you think about it, is Thich Nhat Hanh and his ability, when he talks about kind of eating an orange like that, somebody eating an orange like that, are they more wealthy than somebody who's not capable of connecting with that much pleasure and joy, right? So what is wealth? We think wealth is a number in the bank account or whatever, but the experience, the subjective experience of your life, having way more access to ease and joy and pleasure and all these things, right? So can we learn to appreciate the sunrise and the sunset? Can we connect with, a piece of writing that really means a lot to us?
Yeah, I think of almost in the childlike, not in a bad way, in a good way. This think about a little kid sitting eating an ice cream cone. They've got it all over their face. They're licking it off their hands. They're not missing a single bit because it is amazing. And I think that you said, we get lost if we can still our minds and be in the present, right? We get lost in the noise. Children don't have as much noise as functioning adults do. They don't have as much worry. And even look at a toddler learning everything's brand new, and they're just, wow, or they're pointing at notice the bus. And you're it's a bus, but it's that kind of mindset of really noticing and appreciating every single thing. And we have that ability to do that as adults, even though it's not the first or second time we've ever seen or done something. But we do lose it somewhere along the way if we're too worried or too in a hurry or too anxious.
Totally. And you don't have to appreciate every single thing. The point is that every single thing is there to appreciate. And if you appreciate one or two more of them, right, that's an improvement. And so one of the big breakthroughs here that we understand is that growing our capacity to receive pleasure is a skill, and it's something that you can actively work on and grow, and literally just moving your attention to it, you can become better at it like tonight, right? It's something that you can just get better at. And if we're living lives where we're forgetting that, or we're set with unconscious programming that tells us that we're not supposed to have pleasure, that we're not good enough to have pleasure, we don't deserve pleasure yet, or whatever, we need to rewire that, right? We need to get better at that, okay? So some people might be set up, and I have people online that I'm actually friends with who teach a lot of pleasure, and they're all about like sensuality and pleasure and all this stuff. And they get very, myopic about that like that's the only way to do it. That's the only way to increase your happiness. And it's clearly not, right? There's other things that really matter as well. And so the next one is the good life, right? Let's get into number two. And the next one is, if we think about that, it's being engaged in something. It's your work. It might be your parenting or whatever. It's this time when kind of time stops, right? And so, this is really related to being in your passions. And, this relates to like flow, which is, I think there's a ton of new books out about flow and all that stuff. And again, people get very myopic about that like flow is the only way, that's what I need to get and all that stuff. Tons of books on that. You can definitely learn about it. But let's talk about like what passions are, right? Passions are what you are naturally and just easily kind of drawn to be curious about. You probably have a certain amount of skill in that area. It probably has a proper amount of challenge, right? Like if it's too challenging, we'll get discouraged. If it's not enough, it won't be interesting enough for us.
Right.
Okay? And so imagine like, the obvious ones are the athlete who just all day long could sit out shagging flies because he's just lost in the pleasure of that activity, right? There's a flow state there, right? That's a good life. That's something where he's got something that really, really matters. And when Martin Seligman talks about this, he's got examples of people who are, really dialed in as accountants or really dialed in as like a chess expert or whatever. And if you don't have that in your life, if you don't have any place that you're passionate about, one way too to think about this is if you're in an airport and you're looking at all the magazines, like which magazines do you just kind of naturally go to?
Right.
In tech or golf or cars or business ideas or whatever. Those are the things that you probably have more passion about than others. So if you take nothing away from this section of this talk, honor your passions. Make sure that you're giving time to follow your own interests and, find hobbies, or if you can make them be what your work is about. Like I'm incredibly passionate about personal development, right? I'm absolutely in on learning how to do it and what is hypnosis and what is NLP and what are we doing, what are the coaching structures that are most important, and I'm reading books about it. I'm deeply passionate about this work, and because of that, my life, the quality of my life is way higher than if I were just lost and had nothing I was passionate about or couldn't do that. So probably the highest good here is if you can make your work include a lot of your passions, but even if you can't, you can have passions, touching your life on the weekends or things like that, right? So,
and I think that's an important distinction because I think, I know there's one more life to talk about, but just looking at those first two, I know that people have asked you or you've talked about how they're different because people get confused. They think, oh, if it feels good, it's my hobby, it's my thing. There's slight difference. I mean, they definitely overlap, but there's slight differences between a passion, and it's something that when I first talked about this with you, it really kind of struck me. I was like, oh, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
In the sense that, not only are you you have a natural ability or maybe a natural knack for something, but there's a little bit of a challenge there, and it gives you pleasure or happiness to be able to do it.
Yeah.
But it's separate from those things that just feel good that are also important to do. So sure. I thought that was...
I love this. So let's make sure that when we talk about the third life, the meaningful life, that we actually make that same distinction back. Okay. But let me talk about the differences between those two, maybe even differently than you and I've ever talked about it before. If you're doing something that's your passion, there can be a lot of pleasure in that, right? So of course there can be overlap, right? If you're shagging flies all day and you're actually so good at it that you get paid to be a professional athlete, you could just be giggling about that all the time, and that giggling can feel good and all that. A good way, and I'm not saying this is completely the only way we can think about this, but a good way to kind of tear them or tease them apart and think about them differently is passions are closer to like, what are your interests, right? What am I passionate about? Like it's something external to me. And passions are generally kind of selfish. And this will get into the distinction with the meaningful life, right? They're, and not selfish in a bad way, but they're selfish in that, like, it's just something I'm interested in. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it can be about someone else, like baseball. I could be on a team or whatever, but it's like, I just love playing baseball, or I just love accounting, or I love bowling, or I love crocheting, or whatever.
Right.
I've got a passion and interest. Something about this kind of draws me to it. Okay. And pleasure, on the other hand, I think it'll be useful at least to make that more about like sensation, right? Pleasure is really about like, can you like put your feet on the ground and enjoy a walk and connect with like the feeling of joy, in your chest, right? Can you, make a gratitude practice and start journaling every day, 3 things you're grateful for, but not just do the thinking about what you're grateful for. Spend time getting into the pleasure of feeling the gratitude for your mom and the sunrise and something great that happened to you, right? Like, can you feel it? So that's upping your pleasurable thing. Again, go to all your senses, right? Can you taste things and be with them, right? Can you taste a strawberry and really let it just kind of be all over your mouth? And can you eat chocolate? And when you eat it, instead of like, this is delicious, but I'm guilty about it and all that, can you go, whoa, I'm eating it, so let me like really just be with it,
right?
Really enjoy the chocolate, right? Like really take your time with it and let it do it. And again, I often turn it into when we're connecting with other people or someone we love and we're having sex or whatever, like, are you lost in, am I good at this? Do they like what I'm doing? Or I should be doing my taxes? Or like, are you lost in thought, or are you present, and are you smelling the smells, and are you feeling the
you like to redefine sensual, right?
Yeah, totally.
Which is literally being in the experience of what your senses are.
It's being in the experience of what your senses are. And I happen to be talking about sexual sensation now,
right.
So normally I'm trying to tease those apart so we could talk about senses without alluding to sexuality. But in this one, I'm just saying that, we can have more pleasure, like that ability. If you were to get better at being in your senses, chances are, especially noticing your good senses, your pleasurable senses, that's going to up your ability to feel pleasure much more often.
And ultimately be happy.
Totally. And lead to happiness. But so do passions, right? So does the good life as well. So is that pull them apart a little bit?
Yeah,
One's
definitely.
One is the skill or ability to feel pleasure, right? And so then we've got the meaningful life. And here's what's interesting. Depending on what your lens is or what you think really makes people happy, some people might think like, man, if I just had all the money in the world and I could just be, George Clooney or Julia Roberts or whatever the thing is, they probably have so much pleasure in their life because they've got money and access and they can do what they want when they total hedonism, they could do whatever. And that would be the most pleasure. Or someone else might be like, man, if I was just dialed into my passion, like that would be, that would up my life.
If I had a job that I really, really loved, that would fix everything. Or
Well, what's a little counterintuitive is, and this is, judged on what the positive psychologists out there tend to say, is that each of these ups the game, but pleasure is not the biggest of them, right? If you just increase pleasure. Now, I would say if you get pleasure down the way I'm trying to teach pleasure, if you really can be in your senses, it might be the biggest one of all, right? For sure. If you can really live a mindful life and really be enlightened, really be grounded and just present and happy with where you are. I might disagree with those guys, but just getting better at tasting food and savoring, just getting better at enjoying when you have sex, just getting better at strawberries and eating them, that alone is maybe not the biggest one of these. And finding passions may be slightly bigger than that. But this third one is actually apparently like the game changer. And it may not make you happier necessarily. Like it doesn't lead to happiness every time, but it leads to deep fulfillment. Okay. So what we're talking about here is the meaningful life. And what that means is, do you know your purpose, right? Do you know like the mission that you're on? And so the way that I often define purpose is, it's basically knowing that there's something bigger than yourself that you find a great deal of meaning in being in service to, right? This is why it differs from being passionate about something,
right.
Passionate is about something I'm interested in. For me, I get something out of it. I get better at it. I get to be the best chess player, the best jiu-jitsu player or whatever. But purpose is about, what am I doing for something that's bigger than me? What am I doing for my family? What am I doing for my bowling group? What am I doing for the world? Right. And so I talked about being passionate about coaching. I'm also luckily, deeply in my biggest purpose that I can figure out to try to help other people with this coaching work too, right? So if we were to add all these up, and maybe I'll talk about purpose a little bit more in a second, but if we were to add all these up, if you can have pleasure, dial in some passions, and add your purpose to it, and then also like kind of make that what your life is about, that might be like the highest way to kind of work each of these quote unquote lives that we're talking about here, right? So, the meaningful life is really about figuring out what is your purpose. What are you here to do? What's the mission that you're on? And, one of the things I think people keep waiting to discover that, as if there's going to be some divine intervention that's going to whisper in your ear what that is. Right now, if you just decide to make your purpose something, that's going to be way more powerful than waiting around not doing it, because you can always change your mind later. But if you were to really commit in on this is what matters, and this is some of the deeper work that we do.
I was going to say, and that that's a really important, I think, thing, a tip to give. And it's maybe harder than it sounds, maybe easier, I don't know, but yeah, that's a really great key, because I 100% agree. And I'll even say I'm guilty of it myself, right? People search for their purpose. People are, just waiting or pining for it. And if you just know your purpose is something that serves something greater than yourself, it doesn't have to be as difficult as you might think.
Totally. And so your purpose, again, is finding something bigger than yourself that you find meaning in being in service to. Okay. And for this section of this talk, if you take nothing away, I'm telling you right now that if you just decide to work on something outside yourself, get out of your own head about you and what's wrong with me and why am I not there yet, all that, and just decide to go be in service to something, it's going to make you feel more fulfilled immediately, right? It's going to be a big thing. And when you really dial in and you really find it's something that you can like sink your teeth into and really commit into, this is probably arguably maybe the biggest of the three here to do here. So, and ultimately they can kind of work together, right? If you know your passions and you can make your passions about something that can be of service to something bigger than you, you start to dial all these things in.
I was just going to say, as someone who's kind of a more visual person, I'm thinking, are these linear? Are these on a line? Are they a pyramid? Like, how do these fit together? And I think that's why I really like this whole idea, is because it's really a win-win-win situation, because as we said, doing any one of these things is going to help you. Doing all of these things is going to be, maximize you completely. So like it doesn't have to be ranked. It doesn't have to be, it's just like all of these are good.
It's a little counterintuitive though, because oftentimes we think that, pleasure and passions and selfish things are going to make us the happiest. But it's a little counterintuitive to realize that, no, if you actually work for something else, that might do it too. I think there's probably 4 good questions here, right? One is, how can I work on pleasure and get better at pleasure in my life, right? As a practice, as a way of being. How can I really connect with passions in my life? How can I connect with purpose and meaning and working on something bigger than myself in my life? And then the 4th question is, how can I blend these? Like, is there a way to put these together? Yeah. Something that really leads, pleasure and I'm passionate about and it has purpose behind it. That would be something to dial in on and really, really focus. Here's some quick tips before we start winding this one down. Each of those questions are important. Here's some suggestions on how you can do it, right? You could try to have a week in each of these spaces, right? Could you spend time in pleasure trying to design a really beautiful day for yourself? Could you spend time consciously trying to savor things and being in mindfulness? Could you do a gratitude visit where you remember somebody who did something amazing for you? And, if they're alive, maybe you write them a quick note and then go read it to them, right? You share that gratitude with them. All of those are going to be very pleasurable experiences for you. How about, in your flow, just kind of figuring out, okay, where do I find the most flow? What am I kind of passionate about? And making a date for yourself to go spend time in that space, or spend a week kind of trying to work on that for a little while. And then in meaning, right, where can you be more philanthropic? Where can you figure out like a mission? Like, what are you really kind of up against out there in the world that you're frustrated about? What could you commit into to being more of service and changing something that would be a big deal to you? And one more note on meaning. if we think about Gandhi or Martin Luther King or these big things, they're doing these global or very large, purposes, right? And I like to think that I'm up against trying to change humanity's, mind in a lot of ways, or introducing thoughts that are really useful globally, right? I want to play this big purpose, but even if your purpose is really local, even if it's just your own family, even if it's just helping out a local group that you're a part of, that ups the game of happiness and fulfillment also, right? So it doesn't.
You do tell the story of the lady at the bowling league that I really like.
Yeah, I'm happy to tell that, right? So imagine a woman who lives in a trailer and she's got a 6-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon, and the kids in the neighborhood are the ones who throw rocks at her door and kind of make fun of her because she's the grumpy old lady who comes out and is like, rah. She's barely got friends. She knows some ladies, but she's not really friendly with anyone. Let's be honest, she's angry, depressed, like really an unhappy human being. Okay. Let's say a friend of hers calls up and says, hey, Marge, I want you to join the bowling team with us. And Marge is like, no, whatever. She really resists it. But then she goes, and she's not great at first, but something happens. Enough happens that she's like, you know what? I want to get good at bowling. And she thinks about it, and maybe she gets a lesson, and she decides to get some bowling magazines, and all of a sudden it becomes a passion of hers. She's like, you know what, I'm kind of in this, and there's pleasurable feelings because she's laughing with other people and she's enjoying the camaraderie. And I'm not saying it's like an immediate difference. She's still kind of grumpy, but maybe she's not drinking as much as at night now because she's not self-medicating quite as much. She's got other interests, so she's doing other things, right? So there's where you can have some pleasure and a passion kind of come into your life. Well, it could be this close to getting purposeful. Let's say, and she's not heard this talk. She's not trying to add, meaning or purpose to her life. But all of a sudden she just goes, you know what? I want to get us better shirts, and I think we're good enough to get into a different league. And so does anybody mind if I kind of take the helm? And she starts leading the bowling team, right? Now all of a sudden she's ordering the shirts, and she's calling, Tina and Stephanie and whoever else to you're going to be there Tuesday night? Let's do it.
Right.
And all of a sudden she's bebopping along, and she may not be just giggling all the time, but she's not depressed anymore. She's not unhappy anymore. All of a sudden she's, more together. And whether she would ever call it her purpose or not, she's serving something that's a little bit bigger than herself. So it's got meaning. It's got, my actions have consequences, and I'm trying to help something, right? So she's dialed in on more pleasure, more passion, more purpose. And if you look at her, she could be a totally different person, right? Those kids kind of play with her, and she's like, all right, boys, whatever, what are you doing? She's not that grumpy, ready to almost kill herself kind of person. She's now a person who's super happy with where she is. She's got something that matters to her. She's passionate about it. It brings her fulfillment and meaning, and she's a leader in that space, right? That's a big deal.
Well, I love that story because I think it perfectly illustrates what we're kind of talking about. And it does, in a way, I think it does start with the capability or the mental muscle and the self-love to be able to feel pleasure. Because when I think about, okay, if pleasure is in the senses, there's a smell in bowling alleys, and there's the sound of the pins being knocked down, and the shoes on the ground, the high fives, the smiles, the thumbs up. There's all that. So if she showed up and she's like, I hate this, and I don't like these people, I don't like bowling, that doesn't open any doors for her. But if she's like, you know what, I'm here, she starts liking the click of her shoes and the sound of the pins and the high fives, she's feeling pleasure from doing that. If she's like, I have a knack for it, she's in her passion, and then it grows into something where she finds a purpose. And I think it's kind of a delicate balance between ego and self-love, feeling like I'm not enough, I don't deserve to do this or whatever, and I need to be, the hero, big hero and the big savior. That person in that scenario is totally different, as we walked her through. And in the way that she just is happier. Right. Yeah. She's happier in her life, and maybe it leads to other things and makes more friends and makes money and on. But the point of it is she's happy, and she wasn't. Yeah. And that's really what I want to give our listeners with this episode, is to know that it doesn't have to be so grand, and you don't have to be so restrictive. There are ways to just genuinely be a happier person that are available to you right now. Totally.
And so spend time in each of these lives, right? The pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life, seeing if there's any optimization you can do. As we wind down, I want to back up to the whole of psychology, right? Getting out of trauma and real dysfunction and all that, and coming up to normal. One of the processes that we have, many times what we're dealing with as kids is our parents' unfinished business, right? So our parents come out they're not completely enlightened together. They've got their own biases, all that. And then we're taught all their stuff, right? So right out of the gate, we're all kind of beginning at this, less than 100% kind of place, right?
Right.
And then we grow up, and the rest of our life, we're trying to make meaning and make sense of things with kind of the coding that we had before. And, then in middle school, somebody embarrasses us and calls us fat or ugly, or, we don't have good style or whatever. And so ultimately we end up as adults, and we've got all this programming that's in there that could be, if you're a healthy, good, together adult, and you would be in that normal thing where these 3 lives would be really helpful, that's amazing. Good for you. But there still might be mental things to optimize there. And if your patterning was bad enough, or your trauma was bad enough and all that stuff, you might be really dysfunctional, right? Mm-hmm. And so what we want to do with people, and, there's a couple ways, is we want to help you first off, like really fix that deep inner wiring that you're not even aware of is going on for you, right? So as you become more aware of the wiring specifically for you, it's a humongous game changer, because you can immediately heal old traumas. You can rethink things that have been holding you back forever. You can, get rid of money limits that you didn't even know you have. All these things are possible for you.
Grow in self-love.
Yeah, grow in self-love, all this stuff. And so, one way that we do that with people is through this program called Recode Your Mind, where you literally go in and you look for, are you set up with patterns that are maybe just not keeping you optimized, all the way down to like really messing you up to where it's difficult to get to the next day, right? And I'm not saying if you need a therapist, go look for a therapist. All that stuff is great. But we have an option that is, based in really, really good psychological research and things like that actually address a lot of these issues and can be a real game changer. The deeper one that we do that goes further is, and it's really the way to work with me live, is in this very small group that I run called the Identity Shifting Mastermind. And that's one where we can go through and really work on some of that great dysfunction, get you to normal, and then optimize, way beyond that, right? Go further. And so recoding your mind can do a lot of that, but the Identity Shifting Mastermind is where you get to custom work with me directly and do these other things. So, this is to let people know what we do. If there's any way that you want to check that out, feel free to go to robscott.com and just see all the stuff that's there for you. You can apply to have a conversation with me. You can go ahead and sign up for Recode Your Mind as soon as you want. These are tools that I've spent years and years and years building that can help you optimize, just like, these tools. I mean, these are a small part of what we do in those things. So I just want to speak to that, because the work of psychology over time there's so many good tools, there's so many good things. And, there's people like me out there trying to put them together in a way that are really, really effective.
Yeah. And I'd love to say that all of our listeners are at okay and are looking to be exceptional. But the truth is, like, I know it's crazy times that we live in, and a lot of people are not just at okay looking to be exceptional, but they still want to get there. And so at the beginning of the episode, you were talking about that big swing. Like, so, this kind of thing, applying the awareness, being more self-love, finding these kind of 3 different lives for yourself, that's great. But if you're looking for like a bigger swing, like really working with someone can kind of help you at least get a starting block there. And especially, those 2 programs, I think Recode Your Mind is really awesome, because it talks about specifically 3 different areas. And then, of course, working one-on-one with the coach is great too, because then you customize exactly what you want to work on. But both are good options if you feel like, if Marge never left her trailer because she was, had a phobia or had trauma, or really was like, I'm not worthy of friends, or struggling with money, like that's someone who probably needs that first step. And then let's get her out of the trailer. Let's get her on the bowling team. But there definitely are options for you if you feel like you can't, you're like, I'm listening to them, but I can't even get there. Like, go find someone that work with us. Find someone that can help you get through. Go
get help. There are ways to go, to leave your own trailer, whatever that means for you, right? Yeah, exactly. So just leave the trailer, because you can devolve very quickly if you just stay in that trailer drinking Paps all day, every day. That'll go bad real quick. So anyway, thank you so much. Is there anything else to say about the 3 lives? Is that good stuff?
I loved it. That was great. I hope you guys enjoyed listening too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll talk to you really soon. Bye-bye.